11. The Fool. Years passed, and the kingdom lay in twilight, unchanging save for the weeds and vines that covered its walls. The castle was thought to be abandoned, yet a keen observer could perhaps catch the slow-moving shapes of the knights as they walked the halls of the castle under the spell of the queen. One such knight was, in times past, called Sir Wheatley. He had no fancy titles, and lacked the usual skill required for knighthood. He was tall, gangly, and not very strong. Many had called him a fool, and said that he was more suited to be a court jester than a bearer of arms. It was perhaps this quality that caused the spell originally placed upon him to fade away with time. With his previous loyalty not being particularly strong, and the forced devotion weakening, he came to realize that he was the only one in the castle who was aware of himself. Wheatley approached the other knights, trying to tell them that they need not serve the queen any longer because she was dead. Despite his efforts, they continued to walk the castle, as if unaware of his presence, the spell still strong on their minds. The gates were shut tight, and the vines and decay that lay upon them made it impossible for Wheatley to open them on his own. Wheatley realized that if he was going to escape from Castle Aperture, he would need the help of another. After days of wandering through the castle, he came upon the room where the knights had put the sleeping form of Lady Chell. At first he feared that she too suffered from an ailment of mind as the other knights did, but upon waking she appeared to be as attentive as on the day that the queen was defeated. Wheatley led the way through the castle, and Lady Chell followed him. At last they came to a strange and forgotten chamber. On a hastily made stone pedestal lay the bow. Behind it, on the furthest wall of the room, was a magnificent painting of a figure clad in bright orange. It had been made with swift, purposeful brushstrokes. Indeed, it was Douglas's last work and record of the oracle's words to him. As Lady Chell and Wheatley approached the pedestal, they saw the oracle sitting beside the painting. The small elven creature approached the Lady Chell, and thus did the oracle whisper to her.
A web of regret, anger doth spin. Forget not, her name was Caroline.
Before Chell or Wheatley could inquire further, the oracle fled the chamber, her small form vanishing into the shadows. Chell took up the bow once more, and they continued their journey. They both hoped to use its unique abilities to escape the enchanted castle. 12. The Mistake. In order to reach the castle gate, Wheatley and the Lady Chell would have to pass through the throne room of the queen. As they entered, they found that it had also fallen into a terrible state of decay, and had become covered with an overgrowth of vines. And there, lying in the center of the room, lay the form of the fallen queen. Vines had grown over her, yet her body remained unchanged, and she still wore the crown on her head. Lady Chell and Wheatley stepped warily through the throne room, but Wheatley was not as dexterous as the Lady Chell. He tripped, as he was prone to do, on the fallen form of the queen, and suddenly she woke as if she had only been sleeping. Her eyes fell upon them both, but the weight of her anger was toward the Lady Chell. Without a thought, she reached out and took hold of Sir Wheatley by the neck and choked him until his body fell lifeless to the floor. Lady Chell tried to escape, but it was too late. The Queen's knights had already been summoned, and at the Queen's command they took Lady Chell and the bow and cast them into the labyrinth. The Queen's wrath had cooled, but her thirst for revenge upon the woman who had murdered her had never been stronger. She decreed that Lady Chell would not have the fortune of dying in the fire when she completed the trial of the bow. She would be doomed to continue the trial for the rest of her life. 13. The Escape. The trial of the bow continued. Ever did the Lady Chell use her skill to escape the Queen's traps and solve her puzzles, and ever did the Queen gloat over Lady Chell's doom. Yet just as Lady Chell began to despair, high on a rafter above the labyrinth, Sir Wheatley appeared. So unimportant had he seemed to the Queen that she had not even checked to see that she had slain him properly. He called down to the Lady Chell, saying that he would find a way to free her. The trial continued, but at last Sir Wheatley was able to open a secret door in the wall of the labyrinth, and they both fled. The Queen called for her knights to hunt them down, but unbeknownst to the Queen, Sir Wheatley had locked them up when the Queen wasn't looking. So it was that Sir Wheatley and Lady Chell made their way up to the throne room once again, but this time with a different plan. They were going to take the crown and end the Queen's reign once and for all. 14. The Betrayal. Upon reaching the throne room, they found the Queen waiting for them. She laughed at their ambition and called for her knights. Upon finding that her knights would not come, the Queen was angry once again. As she sought to slay them both, the Lady Chell distracted her, and Sir Wheatley leapt up behind the Queen. He reached out and pulled the crown from her head. So shocked was the Queen that she fell at his feet and cowered, fearful and shrunken without the power of the crown. To the Queen's dismay, Wheatley placed the crown upon his own head, ignorant of the terrible curse that lay upon it. At first his motive had been to free all from her dreadful curse, yet now the power of the crown worked on his mind, and suddenly he too became obsessed with its gift of immortality, power, and the insatiable need for the trial of the bow to continue. The Lady Chell looked on in horror as her friend succumbed to the crown's terrifying influence. She ran to the Queen's side and saw that GLaDOS, once her greatest enemy, was now only a simple, powerless woman and not to be feared. They both looked on as Sir Wheatley decreed that they would continue the trial of the bow, that he would observe them, and that all would be as it should under his control. Still angry, the Queen berated Wheatley. She called him a fool, and said that he had never had any place in the castle, had only been made a knight on a whim, and was a hindrance to all. Maddened by the power of the crown, Wheatley called the knights, who were now under his control, and bid them cast the Queen and Lady Chell into the deepest, oldest, and darkest level of the labyrinth. So flippant was Wheatley in his certainty over their fate that he cast the bow in after them, saying that they would surely die regardless of Chell's famed skill. And thus did evil continue to rule in Castle Aperture. 15. The Portrait. Down, down fell Lady Chell and the Queen, until they reached the very bottom of the vast labyrinth. Unbeknownst to Wheatley, this part of the labyrinth was the very first place the king had begun the trial of the bow. The walls were covered with the designs and colors of that happy time, and in the center of one wall was a portrait of the king, framed in gold. The Queen beheld it, and suddenly the memory of her lost love returned. Next to the king was the image of the long-forgotten Caroline the Fair, her smile and beauty like a burning brand on the Queen's mind. She wept, grieving for the pain that her husband's path had led her on. Yet even away from the crown, the curse of immortality still worked on her mind, and she desired its power. She beseeched Lady Chell to help her escape from the vast labyrinth and get her crown back. The Queen swore an oath that in return she would set Lady Chell free and never trouble her again. Lady Chell agreed, knowing that if Wheatley remained in power over the castle, they would both die, and all her efforts to escape would be in vain. 16. The Confrontation. Chell and the Queen began to make their way through the labyrinth, the skills which Chell had gained in the trial of the bow proving to be of worth beyond measure. At last they made their way to the uppermost level of the labyrinth, but alas, Wheatley was waiting for them. He had regretted his decision to throw them in, and now that they made their way up, he was overjoyed that they would now continue the trial of the bow. The Queen beseeched him to let her take the crown, telling him of its dark effects and terrible price, but Wheatley was not only mad with the power of the crown, but he was also still a fool. The words of the Queen meant nothing to him, and he forced them to continue the trial. Chell and the Queen continued the trial of the bow, but in solving the various obstacles and booby traps Wheatley put before them, the Queen mocked him at every turn. So angered was he that he sought to crush them in a part of the labyrinth that he had designed himself. But just as she had done all those long years ago, the Lady Chell used the bow to escape. The Queen and Chell fled the wrath of Wheatley, and made their way up to the throne room for the last time. When they arrived, they found that Wheatley had his knights guarding the throne room. These particular knights were Sir Richard, the adventurer, Sir Kevin, the astronomer, and Sir Frederick, the enlightened. These three were the least formidable of all the knights in the castle, further proving Wheatley's lack of intelligence. The Queen and Chell fought the knights and pushed past them and into the throne room. Wheatley cast a ball of fire at the Lady Chell, just as the Queen had done years before. Yet Chell did exactly as she had done all that time ago, and with the help of the bow, the fiery projectile smote Wheatley in the back. With Wheatley's power temporarily cast down, the spell laid upon the knights fell from them. Seeing the great battle that was taking place, they overcame Wheatley and took the crown from his head. They placed it on the brow of the Queen, and thus were her powers re-established. Wheatley was furious, and drew his sword to slay the Lady Chell. She fired the bow at his feet, and then drew back to shoot at a high tower so that he should fall through, but she tripped, fell backward, and her second arrow flew askew. And thus, as if guided by a destined purpose, Chell's second arrow struck the mirror made by the king's craftsman long ago, when the trial of the bow had waned. Though it had been forgotten for all those years that it had hung on the wall of the throne room, at long last, in the midst of the fight for the crown, the mirror revealed the final secret of the bow. The bow could not create an opening upon the material by which it was made. The first opening had no exit to connect to, and the fiery ring at Wheatley's feet opened into nothingness, a void that none could tell the nature of. Wheatley raised his sword to strike the Lady Chell, but was suddenly pulled through the opening with great force. She and Sir Kevin took hold of his arms, but the force with which the opening pulled was too great. Wheatley and Sir Kevin were pulled into the nothingness, never to be seen again. Lady Chell would have met her doom as well, if it had not been for the Queen, who reached out and took hold of her arm. But what became of Wheatley and Sir Kevin? Many said that they met their end in the nothingness that the bow opened. Others believed that they were taken to the moon, where the strange stone fell from all those years ago. Still more believed that they were trapped within the mirror. Yet for all the words and speculation of others, this can be known in full, that Sir Wheatley and Sir Kevin lived many years in that unknown place, in contemplation and in grief. Sir Wheatley, being freed at last from the crown's grasp, vowed that if he were ever to return to the land that he had so irrationally desired to command, that he would beg the forgiveness of Lady Chell, whom he had betrayed. For true friendship and love is worth more than all the power in all the world. 17. The Farewell. With her reign re-established, the queen was now obligated to carry out her oath that she had sworn in the deep parts of the labyrinth. Although the queen was again beginning to lose herself to the crown, what was left of Carolyn the Fair had compassion on Lady Chell, and set her free. Though it must be noted that in the end it was with more loathing than thoughtfulness that the queen gave Chell her freedom. Indeed, she desired for the former servant girl to leave and never return. The queen's most loyal servants, Sir Atlas and the Lady Peabody, escorted Chell to the gates of the castle. When the Lady Chell stepped outside into the bright sun, the gate was shut and locked. The darkness had lifted from the land around, yet inside the queen still remained. None in that realm know what became of Queen GLaDOS. Some say she still rules, brooding over the past that she lost. Some say that she laid another spell of forgetfulness upon herself. None know for sure. Yet there is one thing that all know without question. Stay far away from Castle Aperture, lest you find yourself in the clutches of GLaDOS the Cruel, and spend the rest of your weary days in the trial of the bow.